Welcome to another exciting and elucidating episode of the Omni Talk Ask and Expert series. I'm your host, Chris Walton.
And I'm Mezzenga.
And we are the founders of Omni Talk, the fast-growing retail blog that is all about the companies, the people, and the technologies that are coming together to change the future of retail. Joining us today live on LinkedIn is the first official member of the Omni Talk Four-Timers Club now. That is Julian Mills, the CEO and founder of Quorso. Julian, welcome back to the show. How does it feel to now one-up everyone and officially pass all those other three-timers, those pedestrian people? How does it feel?
Well, Chris, Ann, thank you very much for having me back. It feels great. I've still got lots to say, so excited.
Yeah, I know. I always love when you come on, and today I've asked Ann to join me because the last three times we've had you on, it's just been you and me talking back and forth. I felt Ann could bring some perspective into this conversation as well. And today we're gonna focus primarily on the role the district manager plays in a retail operation and how, quite frankly, from your point of view, specifically, Julian, they're very underserved in terms of getting the tools and the resources they need to do their jobs as effectively as they could. And from our experience, Ann, having worked in the stores as a manager for J. Crew, me being a district manager for Target in my past life, that topic couldn't be more near and dear to our hearts. So Ann's going to join us today, and we're going to ask you a ton of questions on that subject. So Ann, I think we should kick it off. But before we do, I just want to say for those watching and listening on LinkedIn, just a quick reminder that if you have a question for Julian at any time during a conversation, put it in the chat. Just ask it.
Yes.
Any question. There's no question that's off limits. We want to hear your thoughts. We want to get sharper and better on this topic to hear what's on your minds. Just ask Julian, ask us, whatever floats your boat. Just put it in the chat and we'll try to answer it as best as we can. All right, Ann, I know you got the first question here.
Yes, this is going to be exciting. And I think I hope that this is the conversation that gets the most dialogue because it is such a pertinent topic to what's going on right now in the retail industry. So Julian, I want to come out of the gates firing here.
Yep.
Why do you think that helping district and store leaders is such an urgently critical area to address right now?
Yeah, look, I think districts and store leaders are the unsung heroes of retail at the moment, okay? So over 90% of all sales, certainly in North America, still touch a store. And these people have had, an unbelievable amount of stuff to do over the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. Retail's gone omni-channel, so they're having to run much, much more complex stores. Turnover in the industry is very high. They're understaffed, so about 1 in 4 store manager roles at the moment is vacant. 1 in 5 district manager roles is vacant. And so they're just being asked to do more and more with less and less.
So in a lot of ways, it makes you sound like they're almost neglected in some ways. Like, is that would you agree with that sentiment that I'm putting forward? That not only they're being asked to do more, but they're kind of being forgotten in this whole omni-channel struggle post during COVID, however you want to phrase that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think there's a particular slice of them that are particularly neglected. Yeah, so if you think about a stores organization, you've probably got kind of 3 rough levels. You've got your kind of frontline store level, maybe going up to section manager, etc. These are people who are, you know what you want them to do and you just want them to comply and do that, okay? And I think there's been quite a lot of effort during COVID to helping those people do their jobs and to deploying technology to help them do that through things like task management and comms platforms, etc. Mm-hmm. And then you've got, your big bosses, your kind of execs up at the top, who again, have been quite supported, have quite a lot of technology to help them, roll-ups of reporting and stuff like that. And their job really is to make resource allocation decisions. Do I have the right people in the right places? Do I have the right stores, etc.? And I think both of those ends of the spectrum has been pretty tough, but they're okay. Right. I think the people who are having a really tough time are the kind of neglected middle. So your district managers and large format store managers. And these are the people whose job it is to kind of firefight. If you think about it, their job is to firefight, find things that are going wrong and fix them. And by the way, wow, there's been a lot that's been going wrong over the last 2 years. So they've been right off their feet. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that particularly rings home to me too, because I think about my time as a district manager. It's a very lonely job, like in a lot of ways. Like, my territory, and I've talked about this on our show a lot, my territory was Northern Colorado, Wyoming, Western Nebraska, and Western South Dakota. I was in my car 27,000 miles a year. Most of the time that I spent in my day was traveling to and from a store. And even through all that work, I had 12 stores in my district. I was lucky if I got to each of them once, and at most twice. I never got to all my stores twice in a month. It was impossible. And so, yeah, it's a very lonely existence. And I would imagine in COVID with the premium on, or how you have to think about the contact you're having with people and how you handle those conversations that you normally would have differently. Like, it's got to be a tremendous burden, to those people in those jobs. Like, how do you think about what I just said, Julian, like in your mind?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, you and Anne have lived this. I think that everyone we speak to in that role at the moment just feels overwhelmed.
Yeah.
They sit down on Sunday night, they try to plan out what their week looks like. And by the way, it's gone wrong by Monday lunchtime.
Yeah.
Well, and Julian, will you elaborate a little bit too on like what is happening that Sunday night? And maybe Chris, you can jump in here too. But I mean, what's happening? What's the current status of this right now? I mean, are people using like pen and paper to put these things together to plan out their weeks and their visits? I mean, what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think there are kind of two main activities that are going on, and each of them they do in a slightly different way. So the first one is working out, where do I go? Yeah, I've got 12 stores across Wyoming, Colorado. Where do I go?
Right.
And so that's something that's typically done, maybe sitting in front of a calendar.
Yeah.
Maybe you've got, a bunch of different kind of task systems you're looking at. Maybe you're looking at, when you last visited. It's quite a kind of paper intense exercise for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I feel like people listening are like nodding along and probably popping in the chat like, oh yeah, I can feel what Julian's saying.
Yeah, and it's somewhat a creature of habit too, I would add to that. Like, you did this last month, you're going to go this time, the same time next month, you're going to change it up a little bit to keep your stores on their toes. But yeah, keep going, Julian. I mean, I think you're hitting on it for sure.
But Chris, there's something really interesting what you guys are saying there, which is, so you're going back to that store because you went to it last 2 weeks ago.
Right.
But actually you may have a brilliant store manager there. Yeah. And the store may be flying. So why are you going there?
Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong. There's, certain things you need to do from a kind of, from a corporate process perspective, maybe a quarterly store visit or something like that.
Yeah.
But actually, you might have 3 stores with new store managers, tough areas, who need 70% of your time. And we don't really balance where DMs spend their time based on need. We do it based on kind of routine. And that's a big problem.
Yeah, and I think that has an impact on there's a lot of impacts to that too. I mean, psychologically for the DM too, if they feel the pressure to always visit all their stores, especially when their time pressure is more, or their time's more at a premium, that starts to take a stress on them psychologically. It takes a stress on them, puts a stress on them personally with their spouses or their significant others. Yeah. And then even for the stores, like you have a good store manager. The last thing a good store manager wants is their district manager in their store every month. Like they just want to be left the hell alone.
Yeah.
And for me, like I got really lucky because my district manager in South Dakota, which was the furthest store away, I had to fly to it, was like my best store. And so like I was lucky if I saw him, once a month, maybe once every 2 months, but that was intentional. But my rationale for that was completely qualitative in nature, right? Like it was just my gut feeling on where I should spend my time. I didn't really know, which I think is what you're getting at in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. So for us, in our language, we think about trying to prioritize where a district manager would spend their time based on, both kind of big tasks they got outstanding. So that might be, you've got to do a particular store visit, a store audit, or, there's a safety process you've got to run, or there's a new store manager you've got to onboard or something like that. And then the other thing is kind of leaked value. So, how much sales is that store losing relative to how much, it could be making? Are damages particularly high, etc. So, it's a combination of those, what we call tasks and alerts, which help you prioritize where you should be spending your time.
And who who you should be spending your time with, right? I mean, that was the part I wanted to ask Anne about too, is like, Anne, from your experience, like, and the part of the thing I love about what you guys do at Quorso is there's an engagement side to this too, which, and I imagine when you were running that store in New York, it probably wasn't always the most engaging experience when your district manager just popped in and started randomly asking you about things. And you're like, dude, this doesn't even matter. Like, because your store.
Right. Well, I thought about, Chris, what you said last time we had Julian on the show, which was, you have these district managers who in some cases are just coming in saying this worked at this store, so now we're going to convert your entire store to follow this thing. And what, Julian, I'd love to get your perspective too on how the data that you're collecting and helping district managers prioritize is really helping people understand what they need to focus on and what might work in another store, or what might not be, or what needs to be more detailed, because that is all, like Chris was saying, that has all been done before based on gut feel, or just what they're seeing when they happen to be in your store on that day.
Yeah, and it's a great question. I mean, I had one DM describe it to me as parking lot paralysis, which is you're sitting in your car in the parking lot outside the store. You've got a wad of paper that thick, and you've got 5 minutes before you need to walk in and sound really smart. Yeah.
Terrifying.
It's terrifying. It's impossible. Yeah. And you've got maybe, tens of thousands of SKUs and tens of employees there and so on. And so what one of the things that, as you know, we're trying to do is essentially translate all of that information into suggestions and recommendations about what you should go and look at when you walk into a store. So we walk in and say, hey, by the way, we think the chips planogram probably hasn't been set because it's underperforming. So you know what? Go and look at the chips. Is the planogram set? Great. Yeah. Okay. That's one thing to fix. Second thing might be, I don't know, theft of this particular item is off the charts. So you know where to go and look at that. You might go and look in the stockroom, etc. And so it's really trying to give DMs a helping hand so they can walk in and focus on, the things that really matter to them, rather than, the first thing they spot that they're just in a panic to kind of look useful about, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think the other wrinkle to it though, right, is it's also coordinated across the expanse of everyone that's working on this, the way you guys envision this, right? So it's not like the DM is getting alerted to the chip planogram or theft in a certain area and just showing up and like randomly auditing it and catching everybody by surprise. It's everyone is aligned through how you envision this to make sure that we know what we're working on. And then the DM is really just there to help shepherd that process like along the way from an oversight standpoint. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I mean, I'm sure you had the same thing. You leave a meeting like that and you've got a notebook that's bulging with papers and notes you've written about that store visit.
Yeah.
How on earth do you remember that in 3 weeks' time?
Yeah.
So part of it is also logging what you agree with that person or what they're working on, and then being able to kind of track that when you're back at your home office, so that you can actually follow up on actions that you've agreed with your store managers.
Well,
I love that because I hated the surprise element of that job, right? As working in the store, like, and it's not just the district manager, the regional manager can come in and just blast you with something out of nowhere. And then everyone's playing telephone and all this stuff where it's just like, let's all just be aligned on what we should be working on and then audit what we should be working on versus these random things that, a lot of times from a position of power get augmented to have happen. But Anne, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say the same thing. I think the thing that I'm hearing here is that you have visibility into what's going on in the stores. Everybody does. The store managers, the DMs at all times, so they can kind of anticipate, like Chris was saying, this is probably the chips, product placement is probably where they're going to focus first, or theft is what we're going to focus on first. That going in, and then again in the follow-up. So it's just like an ongoing conversation. Everybody's prepared, everybody's ready and can follow up. Is that what you're seeing, or your clients are seeing?
And I think that's spot on. I mean, I'm sure you remember what it's like to have, DM turn up in store, and you just don't want to be surprised. You don't want to look stupid because there's something you overlooked. Whereas at least the benefit of this is you get advance warning. You get a chance to kind of fix it. Right. Yeah. Right. Does that kind of resonate?
Yeah. And the other important part of that though is that you get to track it too, because like part of the whole, there's a gaming thing that goes on with store visits too, where you're like, fix what you need to fix, and then you just let it fall off. But you guys are saying you actually track it, which is an important part of this. So let's dig into this now. So I think we've conceptually explained like why there's value here, especially from the lonely position of the DM. Shout out to all my DM friends. But how do you do this? Like, give us the baseline there for what does this look like in practice?
Yeah. So And what I'm describing is essentially an extension to the Quorso product we've been doing for about 3 years or so. And essentially what we do is we plug into, the 10, 12 different data feeds that each store might get. Yeah. So those might be sales, waste, shrink, some labor scheduling data, etc. Plus the kind of macro tasks that a DM would need to do. So that might be, you've got to do a store visit here, you've got to onboard a new store manager, you've got to do a store, refit, etc. And essentially all of those feed into the app, which looks across them and prioritizes and selects the kind of missions, as we call them, which are really the next best actions for each store, each day or each week. Okay. So, it would say these are the top 3 things you can do to drive sales at this store. And by the way, you've got these 2 tasks too. And by the way, here are the 2 areas where you're leaking most in damages, for example. Yeah. So that gives you a personalized to-do list for each store, which is different for every store. Okay. Now, essentially, that gets around your parking lot paralysis. You're sitting in the parking lot. What do I discuss? I know exactly what I'm going to do. What you can then do is basically bring those together across all the different stores and prioritize between the stores.
Cool. Yeah.
And so we say, we know that you need to spend about 3 hours at store A.
Wow.
On Monday. And we know that actually the next best store to go after that is store F, and that's 1 hour away. And you need to spend 4 hours there.
Wow.
Yeah. So you've got 3 hours, 1 hour travel, 4 hours, 8 hour day. Yeah, that's just doable. Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way, on Tuesday, this is what it should look like. Okay. And so it's creating a suggested week for you. You don't have to do that. You can tweak it, but it's trying to take some of that kind of impossible balancing off the plate of DMs. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And right away too. I mean, I imagine as you're inputting data after that visit, it's also planning out the next week or, what needs to look like after that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Chris.
Talk about that. I was gonna say, no, I was gonna ask, this is a good segue. And I was gonna ask talk about what that workflow then looks like, from that point forward, like the next week and then on and on. Like, how does it continue to learn from itself and prioritize and, simplify? Because, I know what I've always liked about what we've talked about before is also, you talked about missions. Like there's a certain number of missions where, that at a certain point, if you give people too many, they're just not going to follow through on them. So like, how does that all blend together from a workflow standpoint?
Yeah, perfect. So say you visit a store A on Monday of this week, we can then start telling you on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, how changes you made on that day are driving sales. So you can just kind of like, keep track of them, almost like a kind of Twitter feed of, how the improvements you're driving are improving the store performance. What it will then do is probably take you through a full cycle and then tell you, when you should revisit that store again. If everything is going great, if everything you worked on is progressing well, it won't suggest you visit that store again for a couple of weeks. Yeah. Whereas actually, if some of the things you try to implement aren't sticking, it may suggest you go back there the following Monday. Do you see what I mean? So it's learning based on the results of your previous store visit, whether you need to go back and spend more time with them or whether they've got it and you can go and spend your time elsewhere.
And so let me ask, so then in a situation where say maybe it didn't work out as intended, you're starting to track the performance, is then the intelligence such that it also gives you recommendations on what to go back and probe on your successive visits? Yes.
Or what to prioritize?
Yeah.
And some of those may be stuff. I mean, I guess I distinguish between missions in our language. So stuff you previously tried to work on. So you're trying to reduce, milk damages, for example. And that didn't work. You know what? So you need to try something else. So it will alert you to that. But actually for stuff that is improving, it'll kind of track it, but move on to the next thing and say, hey, go and look at, go and look at salad bags.
As I always did in my DM job, looking at the salad bags. Yes. But yeah, we get your point from a product representative standpoint. Yes.
Julian, I have a quick question here. We didn't talk about this yet, but I'm curious how your customers that you've worked with now, the DMs, are they able to take what they're learning and also use that to acknowledge maybe store associates even, or teams that are working in each of the areas? And if so, like, I don't know, maybe share a little bit about that, because I think that's one thing, like team recognition in specific categories, because you now have the visibility all the way up to the district manager level to acknowledge, hey, you reset that CHIPS planogram and now it's doing really well, so that you also have points to like call out when you're doing those store visits.
Yeah, and it's a great push. I mean, I tend to focus too much on the improvement you can drive, but the real story here is the human story. Yeah, which is, by showing people how they're making a difference and celebrating that and sending kudos and all that kind of stuff, you make people feel really, really passionate and committed to the places they work at, and they see how they are making an impact every day.
Right.
And I think, particularly for folk in retail who've had a really tough couple of years, seeing, I did 10 things yesterday, 9 of them worked, I'm doing really well. That kind of instant feedback is very, very powerful.
Well, and even tracking, I have to imagine, like over the course of, so many months or years, for retention of those employees, to be able to say like my district manager knows who I am because I'm killing it in grocery and I've been running this team, and we, consistently have all this data to support. I would imagine that that's another area of this that, yes, it's not, bringing an immediate return on investment for the retailer. That's not maybe their first focus, but it is helping, these halo areas around that are being impacted by this technology.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, I would love us to do more around, celebrating the people who are driving the most impact in retail, badges, awards, all that kind of stuff, because there are people doing heroic stuff, and you look at them and they are dedicated and hardworking, and, they deal with failure and pick themselves up from it, and they just contribute, so much every day.
I was gonna say, I mean, that's my takeaway from this whole thing, is really just you're taking the negative surprise element out of the equation in the philosophy you're describing, which I think is even more important now when I put that in the context of COVID, where every day, every one of us is having to deal with some new surprise in terms of how to deal with this virus. And so with that just going on psychologically in the background, if you can take that out of people's jobs and keep everyone aligned on the same missions day in and day out, that's incredibly valuable. But I got to press you again before we let you go here. I got to press you again, because while this all sounds good, ethereally at a high level, very good, quite honestly, take me back to how this then gets incorporated in the broader store ops discussion again. Like as you're implementing this for the district manager, how that still gets taken up, because they play that integral kind of connective tissue role between the store ops function at HQ and the stores themselves. So like, how does this all fit into that broader context?
You mean into the kind of store ops hierarchy and processes?
Yeah.
So we typically work a level above store associate, and essentially, the way it works is that the store ops team can say, look, this is what I care about as a team. We care about, I don't know, this particular promotion. We care about these sales, it's sales in this category. We care about damages of this particular type of product. And effectively, in 5 minutes or so, you can set up the app to focus on the areas that you care about as a team. What that does is it trains Quorso to go and hunt through your data and look for the best opportunities to deliver those priorities, those KPIs in our language. Okay. So for example, if I care about reducing waste of fresh produce, Quorso will look through it and it's this particular salad bag at this particular store that is a really big opportunity. Yeah. What it then does is it pushes those out, hundreds, thousands of those every day, to your DMs or to your stores, and says, look, here are the things that you should be working on now. And as we talked about earlier, it's prioritizing those versus everything else they've got to do. Yeah. All of the different data they've got to look at, all of the other tasks they've got to do. And it's telling them, just, this is your ideal day. This is what you should do. Okay. And then, as we talked about, it's actually tracking what they do to try and improve in that area, measuring it, and then coming back and celebrating. So it's really joining up the store ops team at the center who can run the whole store network in a really kind of data-driven way, right down to the kind of store manager, or in some instances, kind of trading manager, so someone running a department in the store. And it's linking that up all the way. Yeah.
Yeah. And then how do you do that? Like, what do you guys have examples of that, or resources, or a process that you're using with companies time and time again now to take them through that, to set this up quickly and efficiently? And how long does that take?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, it's a very established process now.
Okay.
You can read about it. We've got lots of case studies, etc., on our website. We work with 3 of the 20 largest retailers in the world. We work with 2 of the 5 largest store networks in the world, etc. And what you can see if you go there is, it typically takes, depending on how quickly you can get through InfoSec, etc., something between 10 days to 14 days to kind of set this up. So it's very, very quick. And typically from kind of day 2, day 3 of launching missions, you're starting to kind of create value, because it's that quick. It's just directing people to focus on the right thing. So it's a very, very quick process. And what we typically see is people start kind of small. They start by bringing a little bit of data, a couple of tasks, and they add more and more and more and more, to the point when actually they can switch off a lot of those kind of 20, 30 reports they might otherwise send down to stores. Yeah.
Got it. And are there like different, so when you go through this, like, cause I know companies typically love this kind of stuff too. Are there like definitive stages that you guys do to this? Like, is there like a discovery phase, and then you move into like, the deployment phase, et cetera? Like, how do you guys look at that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the first phase, actually, I would suggest every retailer does, has nothing to do with Quorso, which is, go and speak to your stores and work out how much you're actually sending them each week. And then go and speak to your DMs and ask them what you're asking them to do every week. And I think you'll be shocked by the workload that you're dumping onto those people. Yeah. As I mentioned to you before, on average, we see each store gets 30 to 40, different reports each week. Yeah. So, it's getting a huge amount of information, and then it's probably getting 50 to 100 tasks on top of that. So we're asking people to do a huge amount. That's the first thing you can do, which is just like confirm there's a problem. Yeah.
Right.
And then I think if there is a problem, the next step is typically do a little pilot. Spend a couple of months, plug in some data, try it with 5-10% of your stores, check that this kind of works for you, you like it, etc. And then you can scale from there. Does that make sense?
It does 100%. It does. And my mind's just going on, my mind's just been going on this whole conversation this whole time. And, it's when I step back, Julian, and I know we've had you on the show 4 times, which you made a joke about in the beginning. This was the point of the conversation I wanted to get to, because when I first met you guys a year and a half ago, I was putting myself in the shoes of being a district manager and just feeling palpably how much value what you're describing could ultimately create. And so it's awesome to hear all of this described in detail like you just did. I hope the audience found it, really exciting as well. Thanks everyone for their questions. For people that were watching this today, got inspired on it the same way Ann and I did, from the position of having worked and lived this every day.
They want to look smart from their cars to the entrance
right.
of their stores. They
don't want to be
they want to have
anymore.
that. Yes, exactly. They want their Sunday nights back.
Yeah. Right. And those are real things. Like, if people want to learn, in a nutshell, people want to learn more about Quorso, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so 2 things. I think, in fact, 3 things. I think, first of all, check out our website. There's a lot of great content on there, etc. Lots of good case studies, resources, etc.
There are.
Second thing, please always get in touch with me. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Julian Mills, or drop me a note, julian.mills@quorso.com. But please no spam. Or the third thing is we're going to be at NRF.
Yeah, right.
Which we're really excited about. We're still going to be there, and please come and find us. We're going to be on level 1, booth 42, which is just outside the main stage. So really excited to be there. And I think Chris and you guys are going to be there too, we hope.
We'll be the gatekeepers of the innovation lab. We'll be the first people that you see on your way in and the last people on your way out. So have a conversation with Julian. It will be much better than in his beautiful British accent than anything else.
We're trying to decide. Yeah, we're trying to decide whether or not we put ourselves in a plastic bubble or bring plexiglass with us. But we'll be there with bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and it'll be fun to see you guys. But yeah, definitely stop in and check out the Quorso team and what they got going on. If you guys found this interesting, or drop Julian a note on LinkedIn as well, or check out the website too. But all right, man, that was awesome as always. Great. Julian, 4-timer, congratulations on that feat too. We don't bestow that on everyone. In fact, you're the only one. So kudos to you. So again, Julian Mills, CEO of Quorso. Thanks for being with us today. To everyone watching live on LinkedIn or listening via podcast or watching on video, as always, be careful out there.